Hey, today I'm talking about context engineering. What is it? How to use it? And a three-step framework for practically using it on a daily basis. Now, fundamentally, context engineering is a pretty brand new phrase. As you can see here, from over the past 2 years, there's basically no interest of it, and only the past couple months, it's shot up significantly. If you just go on Twitter, you'll find a zillion different people talking about their own version of context engineering. But by and large, I think you can very easily say that this phrase has entered the breakout phase. Now, I want to provide that context just to make sure that it's clear that this is my own version of context engineering. It was pretty strange to see this phrase popping up because I was talking about context engineering over 2 years ago at this point, and I thought I was kind of just a crazy person talking in a in an echo chamber. As you can see here, I published this June 2nd, 2023, and it got 100 views, which is cool. I mean, that's 100 views since then. I only mention this just to clarify that this is my version of it. There's a million different ways to interpret this, and it's clearly a growing field with a lot of different people contributing to it. So I've seen context engineering talked about as like a rebranding or an iteration on prompt engineering. I think maybe in some version if there might be a truth to that, but that's not how I think about it. Uh, for context, the way I think about it involves this core truth. All computers, every single function, operation that happens, it's a three-step process. You have your input, your transformation, and your output. Obviously, very simplified, but that's true. The way I think about that in terms of context and prompt engineering, you're just focusing on that core process, that input, transform, and output, on one very small portion of a larger system and architecture. So you're only focusing on maybe like 5% of the problem when figuring out even just what input, transform, and output to even perform. Uh, that's the broader question and discipline of context engineering. So prompt engineering only focuses on asking the questions of what goes into the prompt, why, and what are we looking to get out of it. Context engineering focuses on the holistic picture of why are we asking these questions? What are we trying to solve? Who is this important to? Who is this create value for? Uh, is a human going to be reviewing this? Is the system operating autonomously? What data are we providing to the agents in the system? And given the data and context we give it, how does that impact how the system operates? It's a much more holistic view of these systems and the architectures that in the architecture itself, I guess, than just focusing on a prompt or just even a prompt chain. I would say that's still prompt engineering. It's more about stepping all the way back and asking why. So that's a big thing. Context engineering is about asking why. And in my thinking of this, a big difference between this and something like a traditional, system architecture is that you have to work with um, probabilistic transformations. So, what I mean by probabilistic is that you can't always there's probabilistic and deterministic. Deterministic, you're going to get one of a certain set of outcomes because it's determined. There's only a couple ways that the system could create an output. Probabilistic, less about uh, what can go on inside the system. That's why people will say these language models are black boxes. That's where you have the whole field interpretability, trying to understand what's going on inside of these models. Um, but fundamentally, on a practical level, it is probabilistic, and then you're not always sure what you're going to get out of it. So, how do you work with systems? How do you work with system components that are probabilistic? And the big question is that how do you design systems so if you get a bad outcome or something you don't want, uh, the the structure of the system itself mitigates the worst outcomes while still getting the upside. So how do you constrain models? How do you focus them uh, and build out and think through your failure modes basically? Now, when I was talking about context engineering over 2.5 years ago at this point, not 2.5, maybe two, yeah, uh, I was really thinking about it almost as a philosophical question of thinking about when you put something in, what you say to the model and what you actually want is not the same. and thinking about the actual almost epistemological. So the study of epistemology is the study of what you can know. Um, Thinking of what can you know when prompting or using these tools. Uh, that's kind of the fundamental framing I was going with. I think just given what I've seen so far from other people talking about, it's much more applied. So this still undergirds a lot of how I think, but today I'll be talking about like a very practical framework to apply to building end systems. So I think there's three big things to think about when thinking about context engineering. Number one is the big why, uh, your subjective taste of what do you want the system to do, why, for who, and how you're evaluating it. I believe as AI and agents commoditize most execution from knowledge work, the fundamental moat and big question that we left to answer and over again is around taste. So what I mean by that is a preference, uh, preferences, taste, discernment, everything that is like subjective in your I prefer this version over this version of this thing, and you may have some reasons to justify it, but at the end of the day, it's subjective and comes down to taste. That's what I mean. All these systems, you can build. You're going to build like an example of this is you have two law firms. They both want a uh, AI agent system to help them draft mergers and acquisition contracts faster. On the surface level, this sounds very much the same. Sounds you could reuse that perfectly. But when you actually talk to these attorneys, you're going to find that they have very, very different preferences on how to draft contracts, what questions to have agents ask, what inputs they want input to a given like drafting pipeline. That's what I mean by taste. So you're starting with that question. And that's again starting with the why. Why is this important? Who's important to? Why is this valuable to them? Leaning all the way into that subjectivity. Yeah. So from there, then it's actually taking that subjective taste, that outline you have basically, then operationalizing that into an actual architecture. So think about your data sources, the actual foundation models you're using, what processes you want to operationalize, what agents are going to run those processes, thinking that through end to end. And then finally, at the very end of that, after thinking through all of those questions, very methodically, you could say, then you get to the actual end prompts that you want to be using. So another way to view this, I like, is or visualize this, is actually as a pyramid, each one building on top of the other one. And like I mentioned, the first layer starts with why. Uh, all these systems are always going to be reviewed by a subjective viewer. So that's where the taste comes in. Yes, you're going to have objective evals and reports and metrics and every single analytic point you want to gather or you can gather. But fundamentally, this has to create value for an end user. It has to do something for a subjective viewer, and that's where you start. So thinking about how to operationalize taste, there's a couple different ways to start. Generally, if you have a client, you're a partner, or like a business stakeholder, or something like that, else like that, um, though that person is your most important stakeholder because either you're trying to get their expertise, like for that legal drafting example, and going to be working with them as like, hey, like tell me exactly, like detail by detail. It's like excruciatingly, like almost painfully detailed um, process of, hey, how do you thinking this through? What questions do you ask yourself? Where do you go and look for more information? How do you make decisions? And the process of that, you go through that process, one, to actually get that intuitive understanding yourself, because you don't have that domain expertise, you never will. Not that you never will, but it's just there's that intangibility that you can't like go and figure out on your own versus that expert. Um, Getting back to the point though, there's oftentimes when you ask somebody about a process they're an expert at, it looks effortless from the top level. But there's a million micro decisions being made. They're making a million micro decisions at every single step in the process. So you ask them, well, how many steps did this thing take you? And they say 5. Okay, well, when you really work through that with them, there's more like 37 or whatever the actual number is. I'm making that up. But working through that intangible process allows you to then understand the core value that the system has to. It won't replicate it, but it'll have a distilled version of solving for something. So part of that is taking your input stakeholder and also then thinking about, okay, well, what do they want to use this for? There's that legal contract example I gave you, but another one is for a good example is doing like technographic analysis. I had a client that wants to do that, and their purpose for that is being able to say, hey, IT firm, we saw that you have this current bank as a client. We did a huge analysis of their technographics, their enterprise software stack, and we saw that they run these 3 pieces of software. And given our expertise, our understanding, that means they're probably ready for this data modernization or AI modernization. It's understanding the end goal so you can holistically build in the right variables at the right point in the architecture. So that brings us to architecture. So there's 2 things to think about when you're thinking about architecture. Number one, this is not unique to context engineering. It's a truth in general. Complexity that is not justified, that doesn't do something, gets in the way. It's expensive. It should be fought at all costs. You should always strive for the minimum effective complexity. So what that actually looks like is only adding in. This is how I think about it. You generally want to pick the simplest tool for the job until it's getting to the point where it actually would be easier to use the more complex tool. And that's counterintuitive. But what I mean is that there's a certain point where, let's say like you're using like a no-code tool, like a low-code tool, like N8N to prototype out some AI agent workflow or something. And you just need to do 1 or 2 steps, get it working. And you say, okay, this is creating some value. It's getting the right output that I want. It's doing this analysis. It's ranking this insurance decision. I don't know. Then you say, okay, I want to add on to this. Well, when you find you're adding on to it, it's really painful because maybe the AI agent node wasn't made to, run this many steps, or you're having to chain together 90,000 nodes or something else like that. There's that layer of the UI that's now actually getting in the way. That's making it harder if you just went to code itself. So I think of that as like a step function. You're like, okay, working here, good. We're proving out the value. We want to do more technically. Let's step up to a more complex tool because it's actually more flexible and that's easier in the long run. And then you go up, and then wherever your sweet spot is, that's reset. So then another way I think about this is this system going to be scaled vertically in that you're going to have 1 million agents all running the same prompt chain and architecture, or is there some more so meant to augment a team? Let's say you want to build out like you want to operationalize like your best copywriter's expertise. You want to take her understanding, his understanding, and distill that down into an agentic system. Well, if the architecture you use and the decisions all the way from the prompt to the like model, you could say end to end, basically, whatever. That matters. That differs if it's going to be scaled up to, okay, anyone can use this. It's publicly available, 1 million agent calls a month. Versus this is actually really, this is more meant to augment, our internal team. And I guess the distinctions, is it end-to-end automation or is it augmentation? And that's a big question to ask. So then getting more specific, you want to think about obviously, the trade-offs of a bigger context window versus the model. There's also my 2 cents on making a decision on foundation models is like model cards in evals are great. I think um, they're really useful proxies, but they're so hacked. People will hack evals or just not even not even hack evals. There's just both intentionally and unintentionally. Um, Training for the eval means that it's hard to really get a good grip on a model until you vibe check it. Basically, like there's no other better way to say it. Um, People have preferences with specific models for a reason, and I think rather than overcomplicate that, use that as a good decision making process, and then also just empirically test with different models. Do you actually need a million context window, or would you prefer the better reasoning of Sonnet 4? And whatever. It's really, I think that's the big advice here is rather than depend on evals or just testing one model at a time, just do an A/B test and decide what output you like and why. Going back to the taste thing. So then figuring out the foundation model you have, now you have to figure out how you're going to connect the raw context sources you have to those models, and actually make an agent that can go out and take action on the system's behalf or the user's behalf. Uh, Most days nowadays, that looks like model context protocol servers. So you can have a Postgres server that allows the agent to query your data lake, your Snowflake database, whatever. Um, just figuring out the raw tools they actually provided, the context you give on how to use the tools. So this is mostly for data retrieval, but telling it what to look for, and then also um, these are not as popular. I think they should be more popular. There's like two rules. Tool. The agent can only call this tool after it's called these other two tools, and really constraining the model to get the behavior that you're looking for. And then finally, after you've mapped out those core processes, uh, what tools you need to give your agent to actually execute those processes well, um, then you start to actually chunk up each process into an own. Okay, an agent's going to own this portion of it, an agent's going to own this other portion of it, and an agent's going to summarize and synthesize the results, the outputs of those other two agents. My advice is generally you can start with this is counterintuitive. I say, yeah, I just said minimum necessary complexity, which is true. But generally, what I find is you're going to have, let's say you're like, okay, we need 5 agents to complete this task. After testing, you oftentimes will find you really only need 3. But the biggest thing for all of this is really just empiricism. It's testing and iterating. It's testing and iterating. The faster you can iterate, the faster you can get to that subject a system and architecture that actually fits your subjective taste and preferences. And so fits that and also solves for end business value. That's largely agreed upon by your key stakeholders. And then obviously inside of those agents, with those agents, you have to have the right prompts, and that gets back to just what input variables do we have? What's the transformation output variable? And just like keeping track and coherence of um, your variables across your whole system and architecture. So this is my version of context engineering. If this was useful to you, I would appreciate you letting me know. And if there's anything else you'd like to see, questions, deeper dive onto actual context architecture, how I go about working with people to operationalize their taste in the systems, uh, ping me. I'm putting this video on LinkedIn and YouTube, I think. So leave a comment or DM me, or feel free to email me. And if this is something you and your company need help with, I do consulting with this on this. And I'm really excited to see where the space goes. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate your time, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Bye.